accept and mute.
Hello, my name is Cody. I am a Santa Clara County resident in District 6 of San Jose, and I regularly rely on the VTA to get to work. And I know many others that do, especially people in East Side San Jose. And I really think it's important to fund transit. And I think not funding transit now will lead to lower ridership in the future because there's less service, and less reliability means that less people end up taking it in the future. And this will just create more uncertainty for the VTA in the future. And I really think these are short-sighted cuts. I really think that you should be working with the cities in the county and the county itself to find more money and even look for a potential grant from the federal government. I just really think that this is like the wrong decision for our time right now. Thank you.
Hayden, please accept and mute and begin speaking.
Hi, this is Hayden Miller. I'm actually not, I don't even live in Santa Clara County, but I visit often, and I use the VTA to get around down there. I'm a student, I don't own a car, I don't drive. And when I saw these cuts, it was so dramatic that it just really made me sad. And I think it's really important that we look into new funding sources that are going to be able to preserve transit. You know, we're in the middle of a climate emergency. You know, we need to get people out of their cars and keep the people who already didn't have cars, keep it that way. Because right now, you know, some people are going out and they're buying cars because VTA is not getting them to work. I was riding actually the other day and I waited 30 minutes at Eastridge Transit Center for a bus that's supposed to run every 10 to 15 minutes normally. And it was hot, the air quality is terrible. And, you know, there are real riders who are going to have to deal with these cuts. You know, some of them can't afford cars or other means of transit.
All right, Tessa, I believe you spoke already, and so I would assume that you're going to speak on the next item. Madam Chair, that completes the list of speakers for this item.
Great, thank you. And we're now going to move into the workshop, and the staff is going to give a presentation, but before they begin, what I'd like to do is ask our general manager if she could create a little context for the discussions of the agenda today.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, members of the board and the public. The purpose of today's workshop is really to look at different gradations of service. We have been, as all of you know, in a COVID-19 environment where the level of service has been adjusted a few times, given some exceptions that we received from the federal government that allowed us to do that so that we could be responsive to the changes in the demand and also working closely with the county government on the reopening of our economy. So what we're doing today, and this is a bit unusual, we typically come to the board and discuss different service levels. We are not recommending to reduce service. We are bringing to you, we are currently operating in the low 70% of our service level that was approved for this fiscal year. And that is driven by the pandemic and decisions for many of the companies to have their employees work from home, and also the reopening of our economy, which is has been done very measured way, and therefore the demand has fallen. We have 25% ridership from what we were experiencing pre-COVID. So with that, I hope that as we go through this presentation, it's clear that we're currently in the low 70% of what we would have typically have been operating. And what we're bringing to you is a series of considerations that would provide a gradation of the different service levels within this within this coming year that would be aligned with the demand, aligned with the budget, the funding that we have, and also aligned with the decisions as the economy reopens And as employers and others, schools and others make determinations on how they're going to open, what they're going to allow, and how that affects or influences the level of service that we should have to be responsive to moving the people that need to be moved by public transportation. So with that, Madam Chair, I would ask that Jay Tyree proceed with his presentation.
And Jay, before you do that, I wanted to just acknowledge that we've had two other members join. I wanted to make sure the clerk knew that we had Raul and Teresa join us. And then second, I just want to say to my colleagues that, let me just talk a little bit about the process for today. So Jay's going to give a presentation. We're then going to go to public comment. And I just really want to encourage, when this comes back to the board, that we really ask all the questions you can think of that you want to get asked, because this is an important thing both for us to have your opinions about, but also to make sure that we really do understand what your thinking is and what kinds of issues that you most want to make sure the staff is taking a look at before this comes back. Okay, so with that, Jay, it's all yours.
Madam Chair, this is Elaine. If I may also note for the record that alternate board member Davis has joined us.
Oh, thank you. Sorry I missed you there, Deb. Thank you.
Okay, good morning. My name is Jay Tyree. I'm Manager of Service Planning and Scheduling at VTA. Thank you for the introduction and the great context setting for this effort. I did want to mention Janice Soriano Ramos, who is the project manager on my team for this project, and she's also joining us today. This is really a team effort, so I get to talk about all the nice work that she's done. So first, for some context and background of why we're here today. This board workshop is one part of a two-month outreach process, which we've begun this month and will continue through next month to gather feedback on the 2021 service plan. So looking back, we implemented the New Transit Service Plan, or NTSP, you all remember, on December 28th of last year. And then of course, COVID happened in March 2020. We started to immediately feel the impacts of the COVID pandemic. And we've adjusted service throughout 2020 as in response to that COVID pandemic. But coming up, we have, VTA typically makes major service changes annually each February. That is per our collective bargaining agreement with ATU that spells out when each sign up is. We have 3 per year, but we only have one, what we call a general sign up per year, and that's in February. And that's the sign up where all the operators essentially pick their vacations, they pick which division they'd like to work in, as well as the work that they do. And so that happens in February of each year. So that's why we're now talking about what we're going to be running next year, starting in February 2021, and that will run through February of 2022. So staff has prepared illustrative draft service plans for you. There's no action now, like Nuria was mentioning. This is just to illustrate the impacts of various service levels that we could operate in 2021. The action that the board will be taking will be presented to the VTA committees in November, and then the full board in December. So actually, before I get into a little more context, I'm going to ask Raj to go over this financial slide for you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Jay. You froze for a minute, so I didn't hear the last words, but when the slide came up, I assumed it was my turn to speak. Again, good morning, everyone. My name is Raj Srinath. I'm the Deputy GM and CFO for VTA. Before I go through the numbers, I want to give a little bit of a context. But by the way, the numbers are nothing but the summarized version of what was presented to the board earlier this month at the board meeting. On the expense side, what we are assuming in terms of service levels are roughly about 74% of pre-COVID levels. That is the current service levels we're providing. And that's what I'm assuming to forecast out through the rest of the fiscal year. That's important to note that. The second thing, on the revenue side, we are of course assuming that we would use the CARES Act funding we have already received, about $141 million, to cover any of the deficits we have had in fiscal year 20 and likely to have in the current fiscal year. We're not assuming any additional federal funding, as there is no legislation that has passed that would give us additional funds. So with that, let me just very quickly go through the numbers. we would end up fiscal year 2020, it's still unaudited, that's being a little bit careful about it, with a deficit of $5.5 million. So if we apply the CARES Act funding to close that gap, we would be left with $136 million going into the current fiscal year. And under any of the scenarios you see there are 3 scenarios, and the revenue forecasts are based on what we received from UCLA a few months ago. We would be able to cover all of the deficit for the current fiscal year we are in. Even under the most conservative scenario, we would be able to cover all of the deficits with the CARES Act fund. We'll be left with a small balance of about $14 million going into the next fiscal year. Under the most optimistic, it's about 35. So again, as I said, the expenses are based on the service levels we are currently providing, which is about 74% of the pre-COVID levels. And the revenue assumptions are based on what we received from UCLA a few months ago. With that, I mean, if there are any questions, I will answer, or I'll turn this back to Jay Tyree.
I'm going to hold off on questions till the end of the presentation, if that's all right with my colleagues. Folks don't mind just taking notes. Thanks.
Great, thank you. So 2 more slides for context before we get into the 2021 service plan, one about ridership and one about our service levels. So this slide shows our ridership for 2020 from February through August. And you can see obviously the impact of the COVID pandemic on ridership had the pretty immediate effect of dropping ridership down to about 74 or 75% lower than our pre-COVID levels. The other thing I want to note on this slide here is that ridership is down 74, 75%, but also note our capacity is also down due to social distancing, somewhere in the range of 80 to 90%. Then about service levels, first, just to define what we mean when we talk about service levels. Service levels is basically all of the amount of total service that we put out in the network. This includes bus service, light rail service, and then special event service and school-oriented service as well. And so this is the total amount, and we quantify it in terms of the annual service hours that we put out. So this is the slide that Raj was referring to about the service levels that we're operating. The 100% level was our baseline, the pre-COVID amount. That's about 1.5 million annual hours of bus service and 173,000 annual hours of rail service. So that's the 100%. Like Raj said, we dropped down our service immediately in response to the pandemic down to 58% of those levels. And then we've made a couple gradual increases in service, once in June and then again in August, to respond to the changing market conditions. And now we're running at about 74% of the 100% pre-COVID level. We'll continue to run that 74% through February of 2021. So we're not anticipating making any major changes to the current service. So what we're talking about today is what will be the next major service change that will happen. So now, looking at 2021, we're going to have to pick a service level for 2021. Normally, we would do this in the October timeframe. The board would make a decision in October, but we compressed the timeline this year so that we could give ourselves as much time as we could, and so we'd have as much information as we could when we make that decision, considering all the things that are at play here, the financial impacts, the financial picture of the economy, the trends into 2021, ridership, et cetera. So the board will be making that decision this year in December. So we don't have a recommendation yet. Like I said, what we do have is 3 illustrative service plans that are now shown on your screen here. I'll spend some time on this slide. These 3 service plans are illustrative of 3 different service levels that cover a reasonable range of service levels given all the unknown factors that are at play, such as ridership, revenues, et cetera. So I want to go through, I'm not going to hit every one of the rows here, but we have the 3 service plans. One is a 90% plan, one is an 80, and one is a 70. They are all compared to the 100% pre-COVID level for your reference. And the cells in red are the places where it differs from the pre-COVID level. Also for reference, today we're running about a 74% network, which is very similar to the 80% plan just with some more midday cuts and weekend cuts, some minor adjustments from that. So for reference, you might think of today, we're very close to the 80% plan. So I do want to talk about some of the important rows here. The first and the third rows deal with frequency, and these probably are the most one of the most impactful things in the three plans. Today, or pre-COVID, we have a 15-minute frequent network. So service comes every 15 minutes on the light rail network and on the ridership routes in our system, the red routes on the map. In the 90% plan, we're largely able to maintain that. So weekend service or weekday service is still at 15 minutes. We just had to make some frequency reductions on the weekend. But the 80 and the 70% plans, we would have to move to a 20% or 20-minute frequent network instead of 15. So that is a pretty impactful change that would occur with those two plans. And then the other two I want to mention are the last two rows. Discontinued routes, the second to last row. In the 90% plan and the 80% plan, we could accomplish those without completely discontinuing any routes in our network. But on the 70% plan, to achieve a 30% reduction, we would have to discontinue 2 routes in our network. And then finally, I wanted to mention some of the ways we're responding to the pandemic. We're still looking at the way travel patterns are changing and how folks get around now. And so we're doing one thing that's in all three plans. We are currently working with county staff to develop what we're calling the VMC shuttle. This is a shuttle that would go between Diridon Station and Valley Medical Center and be timed to trains. And so folks that work, for example, service workers that work at the hospital would be able to have that first and last mile shuttle. So that's a new concept that we're proposing in all three plans in response to the changing travel market that we're seeing. Okay, so when we developed the three plans, we developed all of these network changes with low income and our minority communities in mind. And as we do with all of our service changes, we do a Title VI service equity analysis that is an analysis that confirms how we did on the low income and minority communities for service changes. And none of the three plans, the 70, the 80, or the 90, would disparately impact our low income and minority communities. You can see the full report in attachment C. So we also did, as a second check on equity, we did a second analysis based on ridership impacts and how they would be spread around the system. And we actually found that there's fewer ridership losses on our low income and minority routes than the overall system as a whole. So that's actually good news for the service changes that we made here. This slide here, I think, is really exciting and important to show the extent of our Title VI routes. These are the routes that would serve a larger share of minority communities than the average route in our system. So you can see those in purple on this map, and it's a pretty extensive network. So that's what we're talking about when we're talking about the analysis that we did to make sure that these routes weren't bearing more of the brunt of the service reductions than the network as a whole. So now my next series of slides, I'm going to walk through some of the impacts of the 70, the 80, and the 90 plans and what would happen. The first is on VTA Access Paratransit service. So you all know that the VTA Access 88 Paratransit service follows our fixed route network. So when you make changes to the fixed route network, you can see changes to the eligibility on the VTA Access Paratransit side. And so we do 2 analyses at this stage to illustrate the impacts of the 3 plans. One is a time of day analysis, where we look at the elimination of trips late at night, for example. So if you remember on the matrix slide, the 70, the 80, and the 90 plan would eliminate some trips past 12:30 in the morning, for example. And so to the extent that folks are using paratransit at those same times in those areas where those routes would go away, then some late night trips would be impacted. There are very few, I'm going to give you quantify some of the numbers just so you understand how many that would be. There are very few people that are taking paratransit trips. So we pulled data from all of 2019. And so every trip that we provided on the paratransit service, 650,000 trips or so. And after 12:30 in the morning, there were 39 trips for the entire year. And so those are the trips that would be impacted in the 80 or 90 plan. Now in the 70 plan, the service would be pulled back on some routes to 10:30. And so there's a little more impacts on that one because there are more people that take paratransit trips between 10:30 and 12:30 in the morning. There were 2,363 people, so about 6 a day, that took a trip between 10:30 and 12:30. So the 70 plan would certainly have more impacts on the time of day analysis. So the second analysis for paratransit is a geographic footprint, so the availability based on where the trip would start or end. So in the 90 and the 80 plans, because we're not discontinuing any routes, then there's no impact on the geographic footprint of paratransit service. I'm going to use the next slide actually as my map here to show this. But in the 70 plan, we would discontinue 2 routes. And so on this map here, it shows the geographic availability of paratransit service on a weekday. The white area is the area that is covered in our standard paratransit fare, and then the cross-hatched area around the white is our premium paratransit fare area. And so you can see by discontinuing Route 83 in Almaden, there's some impacts that are illustrated in yellow and orange on the map there. So the orange area is the area that would no longer be eligible for paratransit service at all. In 2019, 168 people, or 168 trips, actually, not people, were taken that either started or ended in this orange zone that would no longer be available. So that's less than 1 a day, about half a trip a day, or 1 every 2 days. And then but the yellow area is the folks that would move from the standard fare zone to the premium fare zone under the 70 plan. This was 888 trips in 2019, so about 3 per day. And so it does illustrate that in the 70 plan, there are certainly some paratransit impacts as far as availability across the network. This slide here shows impacts on connections to the BART service at Milpitas and Berryessa transit centers. BART in 2021 will likely be running at 15 minutes or 30 minutes, one of the two. So to the extent that we change our frequent network frequency, we could be offset from BART, right? And so under the 90 plan, because we maintain a 15-minute network, then we're okay. The light rail service could be timed and coordinated with BART, as well as all of the red routes that you see in the little map here, routes like the 60, the 77, and the 66. They would all be at 15 minutes as well. But under the 80 and the 70 plans move to a 20-minute network, which would include light rail and those routes, the red routes there, they would be offset, right? We'd be running it every 20 minutes and BART would be running at either 15 and every 30. And so connections couldn't be scheduled, so they would be seamless. This slide here shows the estimated ridership impacts of moving to the 90, 80, or 70 plans. Of course, less service will mean less riders or fewer riders. For reference, we carried about 33, 34 million annual boardings in pre-COVID. 10 million currently is how many we're carrying on an annualized basis. So you can see the 90 and the 80, the 70 plans would reduce ridership by about 10%, 20%, and about 27% as well. Importantly, these estimates assume 2 things. One, that the shelter-in-place restrictions are fully relaxed by the time that we implement this plan in February of next year. That obviously, if that was not the case, that would have a huge impact on our availability to carry riders. Second, we're also assuming that ridership demand returns to pre-COVID levels, right? And so whether that's true or not, we don't know. But nonetheless, the 3 ridership impacts here illustrate the relative impact of the 3 different networks. So you can kind of give them as a ceiling, depending on how that return to ridership levels happens over 2021. So now we have 3 slides to illustrate the impacts on local development programs, because these are important. This first slide is related to the state law, which defines what a major transit stop is. And essentially, per state law, a major transit stop is service that is 15 minutes or better. So there's a pretty hard delineation at 15 or better, and then worse than 15. So this law is used in several places, many intended to streamline developments at the local level. For example, under CEQA, the lead agency can screen out a VMT analysis under CEQA if the project is next to quote unquote a major transit stop. Similarly, in affordable housing, there's a 20% density bonus that can be applied for affordable housing, but it's required to be next to a major transit stop. And so again here, that move of our frequent network from 15 minutes to 20 minutes on the 80 and the 70 plan would impact some development projects for meeting those criteria. And that the impact is the same on the 80 and the 70 because it's essentially the same 20-minute network. No impact on the 90, of course. The second land use impact here is on affordable housing. The ASIC grant program requires TOD projects or projects that are applying through the TOD category to be next to 15-minute service. So the extent that, again, the same thing on the 80 and the 70 plan, if we move to a 20-minute network, then it would adversely impact some affordable housing projects because they would no longer be eligible to apply under that TOD program. They could still apply, they just wouldn't be under the TOD category and it would be more competitive. And then the third is, excuse me, on Plan Bay Area 2050. So in Plan Bay Area 2050, local PDA, the local PDA process, this is how it was developed. The 15-minute network of transit service was used as a kind of a fundamental baseline to develop the growth forecasts, to assign the growth to different municipalities in different areas. And so to the extent that we move away from that 15-minute network, it could potentially make it more difficult for cities, municipalities, local areas to accommodate those growth targets since the transit service won't be as good as it was planned to be. So those are the impact slides. I'm going to talk a little bit about process here. Like I said, we're in our 2-month outreach process. We just started this month. We will be taking feedback through October 18th. So the feedback has not closed by any means. We're still welcoming feedback from all communities. And we've already started, had a few community-based organization meetings, and we'll be doing everything we can in the next 2 months to get outreach to our riders. We're doing social media postings, we're doing email blasts, we're doing Nextdoor posts on nextdoor.com. We're doing advertisements. We have a project website. There's an interactive feature on the website where folks can go on and they can explore their area and explore the service and the 3 different networks and comment and provide feedback. We also have a flyer that's posted at all 3,000 of our bus stops. That's in the lower right-hand corner of the screen there in 3 languages. Of course, COVID does impact our ability or it does impact how we're doing outreach. It's going to look a little different because we can't do our typical community meetings with a bunch of people in the room. So we're really relying on a lot of community-based organizations such as the Hope Center, CalWorks, the Refugee and Immigrant Forum, and business groups like the Moffett Park business groups. Also, we'd like your help. So yesterday you should have received an email from staff that has information about this public engagement effort that you can share with your constituents. The email has unique links and to specific changes to the transit network in the 3 scenarios based on the city or area that you all represent. In addition to messages that you can cut and paste and put in your newsletters, social media channels, and other communications that you have. So we're already getting some great responses, and we're very grateful for those of you that have indicated that you're happy to help spread the word. And so we really do thank you for that. That's going to be very, very helpful for us. So we're not asking for a decision today. This is for discussion purposes about the 3 illustrative plans, but just as a kind of a preview of what we might be heading towards later, these are 3 potential options that we're considering for a recommendation in December. We could have something like this, where we have a 70 plan that would represent a gradual decrease in service from today, an 80 plan, an increase, and then a 90 plan, which gradually steps up service. That's an option too. We can always move to an 80 plan, for example, in February, and then do a check-in sometime in 2021 in the spring or maybe in the summer, because we do have 2 signups in 2021, one in June and one in October, that we could use to make up more further adjustments to service. And and one thing I did want to mention that I should have mentioned earlier, staff, there's a point at which service cuts become pretty drastic, and below a 70 level is not something that we felt was reasonable. After below a 70 level, if you try to cut more service, you really are looking at a network that starts to break down and connections can't be made, and it's a really it's not a level that we would recommend. So I just wanted to mention that, because I think that just to kind of give some perspective, that 70 is really the floor of the service that we'd recommend.
Thank you. And I know that Jason was, I'm sorry, Jay, was that it?
I have 3 more slides.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's okay. It's okay. Yeah, I'll wrap up here. So this slide is about a related effort. Staff have kicked off a 2-year process to develop a new VTA business plan. The important takeaway here is that the 2021 service plan is more of the short-term direction for transit over 2021, but it will also, there's a larger context here that we're developed for the longer term vision for transit in the future that'll come from the VTA business plan, from looking at our goals and priorities, operational tactics, and we'll look at different growth scenarios and financial projections. So just a little bit of context there. This is a quick schedule where we are. Like I said, we developed the draft plans and we're now in the 2-month engagement process. We'll take that feedback and we'll revise the plans, and then we'll have a recommendation that'll come to the committees in November, and the full board will make a decision on December 3rd. And again, service will begin on February 2021. And then just a slide to kind of help for discussion here, what we're looking for, what feedback would be helpful here. Feedback on the general strategic direction regarding the 3 service plans. Also feedback on how to present the final recommendation in December. We could talk about arranged high, arranged low, 1 recommendation based on what we can afford, that kind of thing. And then also just another plug for, we'd like your help to help us get the word out to the communities. And so with that concludes my presentation.
Great. I'm going to just, as a process, we're going to go to our public speakers, then we're going to come back to the board. Pardon me. So I'm going to ask the clerk if you could call on our public speakers. And then what I just want to share with the board is that when we come back, I want to make sure that we have time for a really robust deep dive. So think about all your questions. Let's make sure they all get out on the table. Any feedback you have, because the staff really needs something from us before they go out to the community. And I'm interested if there's any kind of shared thinking about the implications of that also for what goes out in terms of what's presented to the community. So anyway, I'm looking forward to hearing from all of you. We'll now go to Elaine, are you going to be calling on our speakers?
Madam Chair, it will be Rainey calling on the speakers.
Great, thanks Rainey.
You're welcome. Before I call on the public speakers, we would like to note that we received 3 written comments from the public, from Alex, Robin, and Charlotte. Going to the public speakers, Tessa, followed by John and Howen. Tessa, you may go ahead and speak whenever you're ready.
Yes, I think we are in a climate crisis. We have climate refugees coming from the fires. We have to be hyper local. Everything has to be very hyper local. And we need to realign BART. We need to rethink, bringing people in from the East Bay, because right now people are working at home and nobody wants to go back to work. We want to stay home. That's what the public wants, and we need to adjust that, not look what corporations want, but putting public health as number 1. That has to be our priority. So we have to realign Measure B and reduce the BART expansion to 50% of the transit stops. So we free up that money to create local transit. We have to deal with our South Bay. We have to be hyper local, because this is going to be what's going to be impacting us, not bringing people down from far away. We need to look at that and realign, stop BART to Santa Clara.
Next is John.
Well, I hope I can get this in a minute. Anyway, this is John Courtney, ATU Local 265 President and Business Agent, representing the operators and the mechanics and other workers at VTA. And I just wanted to remind everyone that without bus and rail service, there's no need for a board of directors, there's no need for a planning department, and there's really no need for anything else. So we need to up our service as much as possible. I've been documenting every single time we pass up folks, and we are passing up people in the thousands per day. The process to pick up someone when we have a full bus due to social distancing is absolutely ridiculous. We need to add extra service in between. The planning department should be out at every bus stop talking to the folks who have missed their opportunity to get to work or to get to the hospital, because that's the opportunity that we're missing. And they're never going to come back to transit if they find another way to go. That's the opportunity right there. I also wanted to remind everyone that our riders can't work from home. They're Home Depot workers, Starbucks workers. So thank you and have a great day.
Thank you. Hoyan, please unmute and proceed when you're ready. Hoyan, I will call you back. Natasha. Natasha.
Hi, this is Natasha Kagul. I'm from Los Gatos, California, and I'm here with Turnout for Transit. Transit is super important to me and my family because we use it every day to get where we need to go. And this 30% potential transit cut would have a major impact on our lives, our mobility. And given that infill housing and high density housing is one of the most effective ways that we can combat climate change here in California, the fact that this would impact our ability to build new housing and the exemptions and bonuses that we would get from that new housing is it's really concerning and disheartening. So I would really encourage you to consider solutions to save transit and prioritize keeping it available at least the 90%, hopefully the 100% level. Thank you.
Hoyan, you may proceed speaking when you're ready.
Well, I'm James Kuzmo. You unmuted me. Am I supposed to be speaking?
Hello? James, could you wait for just a moment, and we'll go to Hoyan and then come back to you, James.
Hello?
Hoyan, please go ahead. Yes, please proceed.
Okay. I'm Hoyan Trum with Mothers Out Front. I do not own a car. Let's say my office is 5.5 miles away. By car, I have to leave about 7:40 to get to work by 8 a.m. By transit, sometimes the bus runs late. So just to make sure that I get to work on time, I would leave my house at 6:20 p.m., fully an hour and 20 minutes earlier than if I went by car, just to travel 5.5 miles. It's already a huge hardship to take transit. Please front load Measure B funding. Do everything you can to avoid service cuts. How will transit-dependent riders get to work on time, run essential errands, and take care of kids? What if they can't get to work at all? Many people will lose their jobs, and this will be utterly disastrous. Many could end up on the streets. Service cuts will put many more cars on the road. That would be a tremendous setback.
Next speaker, James, and then Joseph, followed by Eugene. James, please unmute and begin speaking. Yes, go ahead, please.
Good morning, I'm James Kuzmo. I'm a resident of Mountain View, and I want to urge you to try to find a way to keep as much service as possible for the reasons other people are mentioning as well. And also just from an equity standpoint, while the Title VI analysis may note that the individual networks, the reductions may not have a disparate impact on existing transit ridership. The fact is that transit ridership is already disproportionately minority and low income. And so any cuts to transit will tend to have disproportionate impacts. With regards to funding sources, I realize there's a variety of funding sources, but if we can in some way front load Measure B transit operations funding, that would be a great option, even if it means that 25 years from now, we have to figure out how to gain back some new transit funding. I think I'd rather take the 2 decades to figure that out rather than have to deal with cuts right now. Thank you.
Joseph, go ahead, please.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Good morning. I'm Joseph. I'm a student from San Jose. I wanted to emphasize what other speakers have said, which is please keep as much transit as possible. Despite the pandemic, the majority of my family are still essential workers, and some of us rely on transit because we are unable to get a driver's license because of the limits on the DVM and social distancing and disabilities. And so this has been a real challenge, and transit has been a saving grace for all of us. But it is becoming harder and harder as we're seeing some as and concerning as some of the routes are leaving. And so I really do encourage the board to save as much transit now, because I do know that once these routes are gone, they will never come back. Thank you so much.
Eugene, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Good morning, board members. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
My name is Eugene Bradley. I am the founder and CEO of the Silicon Valley Transit Users. Well, it seems like the movie Groundhog Day. This is more of a repeat of that movie where every time that something happens that VTA has to reduce transit service, like when there's a recession for whatever reason. It seems, I realize that a lot of transit agencies like in LA, Baltimore, and New York have also proposed drastic reductions in transit service because of lack of federal funding. However, in VTA's case, there appears to be one other issue that is a priorities crisis. When VTA can spend $250,000 to bring in consultants for BART to ask them to lobby for billions of dollars to bring a system that frankly is also in a crisis in itself, that's a priorities crisis. If VTA has money to spend on BART consultants, they have money to save buses and trains throughout the county. Without the buses and trains, Silicon Valley's economy can't recover. Thank you.
Next speakers, Brian, followed by Matthew, and then Alex. Brian, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
All right. Hi, for the record, my name is Brian Prescott. I live in downtown San Jose. I'm here with Turnout for Transit. I'm also a member of the Silicon Valley Bicycle Coalition and Silicon Valley at Home. I'd like to thank the VTA board for inviting comments on this issue. And first of all, I'd like to thank staff for the transparency here and for the wonderful presentation. That was really thoughtful and I was impressed by that. But I'm really deeply concerned by especially the 80 and 70% plans. I think it'll make it really hard to rebuild the network that VTA has and the ridership. I personally have used transit for several years now. I take it to work on a daily basis. I take it to run errands. I took it to the fabric store so I could start making masks in response to this pandemic. I think transit just accomplishes so much good for us. Personally, I would prefer a 120% plan to even the 90, but the impacts of the 80 and 70 on affordable housing going into the future and the 2050 general plan, I really think is something to be resisted. So thank you for considering saving transit.
Hello, this is Matthew Reed from Silicon Valley at Home. I appreciate this opportunity to weigh in at this very early stage. I also want to thank staff for really trying to frame the range of issues that come into play on this. I do want to focus on the land use development issue. It's difficult to really comprehend the level of impact that this would have on planning. You noted that projects would be slightly less competitive for some of the state funds. We're already getting killed on the scoring, and this would be a dramatic hit. I will make an effort to reach out to some of our members to help document the impact. I do want to note that there's a difference between hours of service and level of service, and the question of social distancing and the way that impacts the service really needs to be considered.
Hi, Blair Beekman here. Thank you to Jason Tyree, who's been working on equity ideas for a month now. He's been presenting these ideas to public meetings. You've offered something of a doomsday scenario for us to deal with. I hope you can, bear with my hostility. That's the only way I can reply to such a, proposals that you've offered. I'm really for the 90% ideas. The city of San Jose is working hard in trusting Caltrain ideas of equity, that they don't have to have fare increases at this time. They're taking an $18 million hit loss this year, Caltrains. As comparison, East Bay Community Energy across the bay, another government agency, is also taking an $18 million hit. So, something is workable and manageable. Please look into these East Bay communities and make better decisions for all of us to save VTA.
Alex, you may begin speaking when you're ready. Alex? Alex? Okay.
Hey, good morning, VTA board members and staff. This is Alex Shore.
Somehow we dropped Alex, or he dropped us. When he comes back, just put him back to the top, and then
Yes.
go to Roland.
Yes, Roland, go ahead, please. You may begin speaking. Roland?
Thank you. Late night trips are a critical lifeline. They should not be considered for reduction, period. Transit level 80 and 90 are identical until February, so I don't know why we would consider 80, because a network design without BART and Caltrain time transfers is an exercise in futility, at which point we might just as well shut down the Berryessa extension. The thing I really want to focus on is Ridership Slide, specifically the total revenues line, because these figures were arrived at by staff without any board input whatsoever. At the last board meeting, I mentioned that these numbers did not add up, and Raj's response was that the figures included TDA and STA as well as sales taxes. I'm asking once again that staff provide a complete breakdown of revenues by source so that the board can provide appropriate budget direction to staff moving forward, preferably without another PRA. Another thing I'd like you to do at every meeting is to show the slide showing how we're going to blow another $7 billion on top of $3.5 billion.
Next speakers, Robin, followed by Jeffrey, and then Tiffany. Robin, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Thank you. 5 quick comments. The pandemic has renewed our understanding of essential services. The transit plan update should reflect that by ensuring and improving access to essential destinations, such as testing sites, health services, community centers, and food banks for people without cars or at risk of losing them due to the economic impact of COVID-19. Second, COVID has re-emphasized the importance of open public spaces for physical and mental health. The transit plan update should provide more equitable access to city and county parks. 3, if transit service is cut, people will need other non-motorized ways to get around. VTA and local jurisdictions need to implement slow streets programs countywide and accelerate investments in bike ped infrastructure. 4, you should revise the Valley Transportation Plan 2040 to align it with the financial projections and to ensure that impacts of the financial crisis are distributed equally among modes. 5, staff should analyze the impact of the service cuts on GHG emissions and vehicle miles traveled VMT. Thank you.
Jeffrey, please unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
On behalf of Working Partnerships USA, I urge the board to return to at least 90% of service hours. We should be considering all options to maintain service, including front-loading funding for operations from 2016 Measure B revenue. Public transit is a critical part of the economic recovery for many families who can't work from home and can't afford deep service cuts. During the pandemic, I've heard from a tenant family who had to sell their car to pay off thousands of dollars in back rent to avoid future eviction. Will they be able to depend on VTA when they find a new job? I think of recent graduates of our pre-apprenticeship program for the construction careers. These graduates include houseless residents, laid off service workers. They just can't afford a car. And our team often has to plan with them how they'll navigate VTA service to get to interviews, to get to tests, as they apply for apprenticeships towards a family supporting career. These families can't be 20 minutes late for a job interview or for that shift at work. They can't miss their shot at economic recovery. That's really what's at stake for the board, and I encourage you to explore all options to maintain service levels. Thank you.
Tiffany, please begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Tiffany, and I'm a student at Monte Vista High School, and I'm 17 years old. I currently live in San Jose in the Santa Clara County, and I am here with Turnout for Transit. And I am friends with students who attend De Anza College, and they're heavily reliant on public transit. And I'm really worried for the air pollution and environment of our county. And I strongly feel that we need to save transit, avoid service cuts, and implement more sustainability and environmental awareness in order to fight climate change. So yeah, thank you for your time and your consideration.
Next speaker is William. You may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hello, my name is William Tang, and I am a student with Edenvale Young Democratic Socialists and Turnout for Transit. It's already pretty difficult to take transit. Like when I have to go to the library, I always take transit. And when I'm waiting for the bus to the library, you can only think about how much like these transit cuts affect workers, how long the waits are and things like that. I second everything that the ATU president says. This is a question of the livelihoods of working people. In addition, we're in the middle of a climate crisis, and we need to be doing whatever we can to protect mass transit, which is a column of the green transition towards carbon zero. If we don't pull off the transition to carbon zero, I don't know if us youth have a future. And for that purpose, we should be expanding, not decreasing transit. But I understand that these are very difficult times, there's less revenue, but we should consider all alternatives. I'd strongly urge the board to do whatever it's possible to keep service at 100% by front-loading transit operation funding with the Measure B sales tax. I yield the rest of my time to the chair.
Next speaker will be Johnny, and then Hayden, and then Monica. Johnny, please unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
Hello, my name is Johnny Gallegos, business agent at Teamsters Local 853. I am a resident in Santa Clara County. I live in the city of San Jose, and I want to speak about how the cuts would impact my part-time members that work at UPS and the members that work at VTA Access. The members that work at UPS is part-time. They depend on this to get to and from their next job on time and pay their bills. The impact it would have on them, it would also impact the community through them if they lose their job because they can't get to work by going on unemployment and taking resources that other people need and they can go to. We stand behind and with ATU 265 and any resources or any ideas that they feel they need to encourage you guys to up the ante on how much you guys are going to put into for them to maintain their jobs, resources, and what they need. Thank you.
Thank you. Hayden, I'm sorry you won't be able to talk because you're using an older version of Zoom. Monica, you may proceed speaking when you're ready.
Hi, my name is Monica Mallon, and I'm with Turnout for Transit. For the past few years, I've dedicated most of my free time to trying to make transit better. So it's been really hard to watch revenues plummet and see these proposals, especially the 70% proposal. But all of this has made me so much more grateful for the service we had pre-COVID. Could it have been better? Of course, but it made it possible for me to access pretty much everything that I needed and build a better future for myself and start to get to a point where a better future for transit was possible. I've relied on transit my entire life, and it didn't just take me to school and work. It took me to VTA board meetings and community meetings and neighborhood association meetings, and slowly over the past few years, I've watched members of the community change, and I've watched some of you change. So I guess my real question is, how are we supposed to get our service back someday and hopefully make it better if we can't go anywhere that isn't within walking distance after 10 p.m.? Please consider all solutions to save transit, including front-loading Measure B operations funding. Thank you.
Thank you. Hayden, if you wish to speak again, would you kindly dial in so we can hear you? Next speaker is Neil. Please unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
Hello, I'm Neil Tripathi, a student with Edenville Young Democratic Socialists. And transit is pretty important to me since I've used it a lot when my parents are at work, and it is basically how I get around and do activities. And so even though I do not have to use it as much, I can only imagine how much it impacts other people in the community that have to go to work or have to go to their jobs. Like, because of the pandemic, they do not have any transportation available, for example. And so I can front load Measure B funding so that we can expand the transit options in order to save public transit. Otherwise, it will affect millions of lives who rely on it to get to work and to help.
Next speaker, Michael. You may begin speaking when you're ready.
I'm really concerned that VTA has singled out Route 83 as one of two routes to be cut under the 70 plan. Our community in Almaden Valley has fought very hard to preserve a bus through the heart of Almaden Valley. The ridership was on the 83 was way up compared to the 013, despite the fact that many trips were canceled due to operator shortage. What other route on your system boasts going to 3 schools, Leland, major schools, Leland, Bret Harte, and Castellaro, as well as the library, using a single bus over at an interval of 1 hour separation? So I think that that route should be preserved no matter what, because this is one of the best routes that for the money that you can put in. Thank you.
Next speaker is John, followed by Sergio, and then Stephen. John, you may begin speaking when you're ready. John, he dropped out. Sergio, you
Good
may
morning.
begin speaking. Yes, go ahead, please.
My name is Sergio Lopez, and I'm a candidate for Campbell City Council. And here in Campbell, we're nearing completion of our general plan update. And I'm very pleased that the general plan calls for maximizing density around transit areas. But we can't solve for a housing crisis if we don't have the appropriate transit service level. So I really urge you to look at preserving as much of the service as possible. And then the other factor that I'll bring up that's important to consider for the next year is that we may very well have a new administration, including our senator from California. And I've been in close contact, worked with Senator Harris and her advisors and many members of the team. And I really think that we would be seeing, if that ticket is successful, historic levels of investment in transit. And so I really urge you not to take these steps now, particularly when a major factor like that may change within the next year. Thank you so much.
Stephen, you may begin speaking when you're ready. Stephen, drop also. The next speaker, Seamless, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, this is Adina Levin, and I honestly do not know why Zoom does that. I am not representing Seamless Bay Area in this call. I'm representing Friends of Caltrain and Transbay Coalition supporting Turnout for Transit. Transbay Coalition is a network of transit rider groups around the Bay Area that are working on many different strategies to recover transit from the impact of COVID. Would encourage you to front load the funding from Measure B to be able to preserve service at the 90% level or more for all of the reasons that people have mentioned in terms of avoiding a transit death spiral, providing service for transit dependent people, maintaining the ability to build housing, and so on. And that will buy us time as a region to bring in more funding to support transit service, transit operations, which is really needed for our community. Thank you.
Next speaker, Jeff, and then followed by Simon, and then Callie. Jeff, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
Hi, so my name is Jeff Iverson. I'm a member of the Silicon Valley Sunrise Movement Hub, and also I'm here with Turnout for Transit. I believe that the country needs a Green New Deal, and I think that with Kamala Harris and Biden campaign winning, hopefully we'll be able to secure significantly more funding. I think that a 15-minute transit schedule is really the bare minimum in my experience to get people to stop using cars and start transitioning into transit use. I recognize that we're in extraordinary times, but I think that we really need to take everything we can, especially all the testimonies we've heard from bus drivers talking about leaving people on the side of the road, indicates that we really can accommodate more passengers. And so I really urge the board to consider all options available to find funding and preserve service levels at the maximum possible level.
Simon, you may begin speaking when you're ready.
And good morning to all. This is Simon O, a resident of Campbell for almost 6 years, and I've been a lifelong transit rider myself, although recently I got a car. But even with that in mind, I still see the utility of taking VTA for regional connections for Caltrain, Capital Corridor, and BART down the line. But this simply does not mean that I've lost sight of the importance of transit for all, because we need a well-rounded transit system that works for all of us, one that runs frequently and recovers as much of the area as possible, especially for essential workers in these times. So I hope the board will help keep transit funded at sufficient levels, because transit's not dead, despite what others may have you believe. It'll simply come back. It may take time, but the ridership will come back, because once we do, we'll need a well-funded, well-rounded transit system to help keep our economy and our society going. Thank you.
Stephen, you won't be able to talk because you're using an older version of Zoom. Would you kindly dial in if you still want to continue speaking? The next caller is Callie. You may proceed speaking when you're ready. Callie?
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Callie. She can't drive, so she's around time.
Callie, we can't really understand you. Do you want to try again or start again?
Yeah, let me start again.
Yeah, that's actually not better. Do you mind calling in?
I can.
Thank you.
The next speaker will be Raj Singh. You may speak when you're ready. Raj? Call was dropped. Next speaker will be Mark. You may proceed speaking when you're ready. Mark?
Please unmute yourself.
Raj? Okay, we'll go.
Hello, can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes.
Go ahead, please.
Hi, this is Raj Singh from ATU 265. I would like to urge the board to consider all the comments of the folks that have called in today regarding the proposed service plans. I just want to point out that all the concerns heard today are based on the current service levels, which is close to 75% already. The 70% option should not even be part of the proposal in November. Anything less than 100% of pre-COVID levels will hurt communities that are heavily dependent. We have the opportunity to make transit stronger than ever. Let's do all we can to provide a safe, but most importantly, a reliable transit system going forward. Front load the Measure B monies. Thank you.
Mark, please unmute and begin speaking.
Yes, why are we only once again focusing on cuts to transit? Even before COVID-19 hit, VTA had already cut 100 buses from peak service compared to 20 years ago, which contributed to a 40% ridership loss, among the steepest in the country. Transit is essential and no route should be cut. Before this board makes any transit cut, VTA needs to review every single highway project in the county. Most of these highway projects weren't essential before, and now that driving is down, why are they more urgent than transit now? As Eugene Bradley mentioned, we have a priority crisis. I urge the board respectfully to front load Measure B funding to save our transit system. We are in an emergency and this is the time to save it.
Thank you. Kevin, you may proceed speaking when you're ready.
Hello, VTA board. My name is Kevin Ma. I live in Palo Alto, and I'm here today with Turnout for Transit. As a transit rider, I recognize that there's a diversity of people that ride transit that are unable to do so otherwise if they are forced to go, if they even own a car or can even bike to whatever long distance their job needs to have. And that things like Caltrain and the buses and the light rail are all important to connect all parts of this community, given how very not dense area is, so it makes a pain in the ass just to move anywhere. Having a 30% transit cut will endanger many in our community to basically just disconnect all of us. And we've been cutting transit for a long time, and it's time, especially given our environmental crisis, unless we want to see orange skies, we really should be focusing on getting people onto transit, and I urge you to consider that and move away from highways and cars. Thank you.
Next speaker, Bob. Please unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
Thank you, everyone. Bob Allen with Urban Habitat and Voice for Public Transportation. And I want to support the folks, especially from Turnout for Transit campaign, who've been out today on talking to you all. I would echo everything they said. We worked along with Working Partnerships USA and Transform Public Advocates and other groups to help support the 2016 Measure B. And I have to say, at the time, we felt strongly there wasn't the amount of operating dollars that were necessary. And what I want to see going forward is that we respond to this crisis like it's a crisis. Work to reprioritize and front load those Measure B funds to prevent these devastating cuts. We know how long it will take to recover from them. I still would say, even though political objections, to move away and shift some of those highway dollars in the middle of a climate crisis while the state's on fire. You can do more, you can do something. Please don't do business as usual in a time where it's not business as usual. Don't let us gut transit. Thank you.
1153, please unmute and begin speaking when you're ready.
Unmute.
All right, can you hear me?
Yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good morning, VTA board members and staff. My name is Stephen McQuay. I'm a resident of San Jose District 10, and I'm with Turnout for Transit. Before the pandemic, I used PubTran every day to both commute to work in Cupertino and back to my house in District 10, which allowed me to read and think instead of emitting carbon and mindlessly and endlessly being stuck in traffic. I also use VTA to sustainably and safely get to and from my various weekend activities. Furthermore, my 4 children, spouse, and I use VTA as often as we can to reduce our use of and reliance on oil. I do not think it wise to cut back a service that will unlikely be returned. The quality of life of this family of 6 will be negatively impacted, and we will be required to use forms of transit that are selfish and harmful to the planet. I urge you to consider solutions to save transit, including front-loading Measure B to prevent any closure at all. Thank you.
Next speaker, 2346, you may begin speaking when you're ready. 2246.
This is Cole Cameron. I'm not sure that's me.
You may begin speaking.
Good morning, everyone. This is Cole Cameron. I'm a neighbor of Monica Mellon in Cambrian Park, and really appreciate all of the speakers. And I appreciate the depth and transparency that Jay and his team always provide us. I'm the new chair of the Veterans Commission, And I really appreciate him working with us to get a bus out to the new San Jose VA Center and really support returning to higher levels, not reduced levels of transit that'll support everyone. I know the students, seniors, and those that have functional needs are really in need of these services. So any cuts aren't really acceptable. And anything I can do with others, I'm happy to join and help. Thank you again for your time in all this area. It's really important.
Last speaker is 2346. You may begin speaking when you're ready. Call was dropped. Madam Chair, we still have one. December. You may begin speaking when you're ready. December.
December, you need to unmute yourself.
I did. Can you hear me now?
There you go. Yes.
Okay, good morning. My name is December Parks, and I am a light rail operator for VTA and an AT Local 255 member. And as an operator on the front line, I have noticed an increase in ridership over the last 2 months. So there is a need for increased service, and we owe that to our community to provide the service needed to get them to work and other destinations that they may have. Also, VTA needs to release the fund for the Measure B frontline money. And also, I think that it's really ridiculous that as an operator, we are operating single train to transport passengers on the main line. I ask that VTA stand behind their slogan and provide the solution that moves this county by increasing service and not reducing service. Thank you.
Madam Chair, we still have 3 more speakers.
Hello.
Yeah, if you could take these last 2 speakers and then we'll go to the board for discussion.
Yes.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, good morning. This is Hayden Miller. Just wanted to comment again on the service increases or the service decreases. I think it's very untransparent how it's being marketed. It's being marketed as a transit service plan when really it's a transit service reduction at the end of the day. So I think the messaging needs to be better to the public, because if I saw that sign at the bus stop and I didn't know it was a reduction, I might not do anything. So I think the communication can be better. And I also think, we need to find a new funding source. If that means, taking more Measure B money right now to fund transit, that's what we need to do, because the service right now is not going to work. And if we decrease that service, it's going to be even worse. The people who are depending on transit right now is our essential workers. And it's really a slap in the face to them that you would consider cutting service when they're working on the front lines of a pandemic.
Number 2346, please begin speaking when you're ready. Two, 346.
Hello, can everyone hear me?
Yes.
Hello, VTA board. My name is Callie Wang. I'm from Cupertino. My grandmother lives in Sunnyvale and she cannot drive. So she was relying on VTA to get her around. Now, thankfully, my mom is retired, able to drive around full time, but that's of no comfort if someone in the family gets sick, then she could be stranded again. And it's of no comfort to the hundreds of thousands of other people across the county who rely on VTA for their daily activities. That's why I'm calling on the board to do everything they can to prevent further cuts, including potentially front-loading the money from Measure B. I think when people often have to make unpopular decisions, they often say there was no other choice. I want to get on the record for the sake of everyone who relies on transit in Santa Clara County, there is a choice. And I trust that the board will make the right decision in making sure that we get as little cuts as possible. Thank you very much, and I yield my time.
Thank you. That's all our public speakers. I'm now going to go to my colleagues, and we'll start with Howard Miller.
So Cindy, are you doing questions or questions and comments?
All together.
Yeah, okay. So I have one question and then like 3 or 4 comments. I was just a little bit confused on the finance. Did I misinterpret Raj's comment that we have enough money with the CARES Act to go through 2021 with no service cuts? Everything fits?
Madam Chair, would you like me to respond?
Yes, please.
Thank you. Mr. Miller, if the board secretary can go to that slide, that would help frame the conversation.
Yeah, the CARES slide left me with maybe the wrong impression.
I think you were right in your characterization, but while they're getting the slide back on the screen, yes, with the CARES Act funding, with the current level of service, we would be able to cover any deficits we may have through the end of the fiscal year.
But returning to normal service would mean a deficit or would be a problem. And then this says nothing about 2022 when the CARES Act runs out.
That is correct. The projections are through 2021 at the present time. That's what we have the board approved budget for. So any 22 and 23 will be part of the biennial budget process.
Okay, good. And then the few comments I have, Cindy, thank you, Raj. That was my only question. The few comments I had relate to some of the dynamic that's going on right now in the COVID space, right? All the schools are shut down. And so our transit patterns surrounding all the colleges, four-year and community colleges, are like all totally messed up. And you know, our ridership is going to change once we get to the point where schools are restored. The state's already come out and talked about spring still being online. But, you know, within the lifespan of this operating plan, we do expect a major change in the way transit's going to work, because colleges that have hundreds of thousands of students attending within the valley are going to go from online to back in person, you know, a year from now, let's say. I'm highly optimistic. I shouldn't say highly, I am optimistic. The election stuff was already noted, and I do think that there could be changes in priorities at a national level that will become more clear once the election is resolved. So there's kind of a question maybe about the timing. Maybe we want to do this a little bit later. And then a comment on paratransit, you know, dropping the one line, and we say it's only 160 or so riders that are going to get lost. I do believe it's within the purview of the board to say, we're not going to lose those 160 potential riders in that zone down in Almond Valley. I'm sure the San Jose representatives will talk to that. But having a family that are in a position where they're forced to utilize the paratransit services, I loathe any cuts in that particular area. And then I have comments for Saratoga that I will feed into the process in other ways, but Rob Rennie is the West Valley representative, and he's surveyed all of our cities. So I defer to him for comments on any things related to the West Valley.
Thank you. Howard, I'm going to now go to Rob Rennie, and then I'll go to Bob Nunez.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick follow-up for Raj. Where does our reserve currently stand?
There are two reserves. On the operating reserve, there's a balance of 75.8 million. That was at the end of the fiscal year and remains at that level now.
And what percent is that?
That was 15%. That's what
that's our target percentage?
That is correct. This is again as of 6/30/2020, and the 15% based on fiscal year 21 budget would be slightly higher requirement, but since we have a deficit, we won't be able to add to that. So if you look at the 2021 budget, this is roughly around 14% or so.
But then going back to the slide you showed, Howard, in all of the scenarios, there's a little bit of CARES Act funding left after FY21. So I shouldn't expect the operating reserve to drop in FY21 then.
I mean, it's what's the eligible use of that. It's not dropping, we're not adding to that. In other words, it'll remain at 75.8.
Okay, thank you. So I do have a couple other questions, but probably not for Raj. My first question is, we're showing a 90, 80, and 70. Is 100% an option? That's sort of not clear.
This is Jay Tyree. I'll answer that question. We didn't propose a 100% plan because that wasn't in our range of reasonable expectations for 2021 as far as ridership, finances, et cetera. There's a nuance here that's important to realize. So if you just permit me just a minute to explain. Under FTA rules, we have to make our major service changes under a full complete Title VI process, meaning the full outreach process, the equity analysis that we do, the feedback, the revisions, et cetera. It has to be a very public process. The 3 plans that we put together, the 70 and the 80 and the 90, are all following that process, but we haven't done that for 100% plan. What we could do is utilize the old 100% plan from back in, I guess, January 2020 or December 28th service. But the nuances get a little complicated there because of the need to approve it with the Title VI process.
Okay, thank you. Next question. There's some comments about us leaving riders on the road. I'm assuming, but maybe you can answer for me, is there a process where riders can come in and report to the scheduler, you know, I'm leaving people behind on this route at these times, and then you're able to adjust that sum, and can you do adjustments without increasing above the 74, or would you have to bump to 76, 78 or something like that to be more fluid in adjusting to inputs?
Yeah, that's a great question. It's really been challenging operationally for us with the social distancing requirement on transit. A few things I'll say on this. We continually look at the data of where the pass-ups are occurring. And unfortunately, the pass-ups are occurring all over the map on all over different time periods, different trips. You know, one trip with a 22 at 2:13 one day may carry 7 people, but then the next day there's 41 people waiting. You know, so it's the variation is really challenging to know exactly when to add extra service. But here's what we're doing. Like I said, we increased service to 74% in August. That has certainly helped the problem. We also have a pretty healthy standby or extra board set. These are operators and buses that are just waiting to go out and be dispatched in real time. And so that's what happens is operators can call into OCC. They also can push a button on their console. So we record the data of when they're passing people up. And when OCC gets a call in for pass ups, they dispatch out those buses as they can and in real time to pick up those folks. But it is operationally very challenging. Make no beef about it.
Okay, thank you. Next question. I'm going to describe sort of my understanding of an assumption and just let me know if I've got it correct. So to start with, despite what our president has said, I don't think we're going to have a widely available vaccine at the end of this year. The experts are saying it's probably more next summer. So I'm assuming in this February timeframe. Oh, and by the way, it was a very good presentation. You answered most of my questions by the time you got to the end of it. I saw, oh, what about, oh, and then here came the answer. So good job there. And I liked the slide where you showed, okay, if we're going to go to 90, we may start at, I think it was 80 and then ramp up at some point in the future. So what I'm assuming something like, yes, that one. Let's take the 90% plan, for example. I'm assuming what would happen in this case is in February, okay, we bump to 80 based on, measuring of ridership and so forth. And then you're assuming June, yeah, okay, now we can go to the full 90%. Some point in here, we'll eventually roll off of our social distancing safety protocols, hopefully some point in 2021. So really when we get to 90%, it used to be when we talk about a 90, 80, 70 plans, we can kind of think, okay, it's a 90% capacity, 80% capacity, but you're talking about service hours. So I'm assuming you're going to 90% service hours, but it doesn't mean 90% capacity because we're at reduced capacity per bus. So then I'm assuming someplace, in the 90% bar, we'd be able to roll back our social distancing protocols because we've developed an immunity from vaccines and so forth. So then actually our capacity would jump further at some point out in 2021, as an example. Am I sort of understanding probably what's going on?
Yeah, a few things, I guess I think I'll add to that. We have 2 opportunities to make changes in 2021. So you're correct. We can kind of, make a choice for February and then wait and adjust as we go in 2021. And yeah, if we were to increase to 80%, that would be an increase in capacity. I'm not sure what it is. Like I said, today at 74, our capacity is down 80 to 90%. So if we go up to 80, it certainly would, our capacity, would get better, and then 90 even more so. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, yes, yeah.
Okay.
Madam Chair, I'll go to comments now. I think I've finished all my questions and you wanted comments, just, I guess, all at once. Looking at, some reserve still on the CARES Act fund and our operating reserve at our target, I can't see why we would want to drop below the 90% plan. I think that's where we want to go. I do like this idea of, phasing it in to match our ridership, so we don't just, jump to 90% and spend extra money when we, don't have the ridership to match it. We saw, you didn't show it here, but we've seen earlier that for the first couple months of the year, our new transit service plan was actually increasing ridership. That was really exciting. So when we get to the backside of COVID, I'm hopeful that we will get back to that. And I want to be ready to go back to that increasing ridership that we saw in the January, February months, I think it was. So we need to be at least at a 90% or 100% to be able to capture that. Of course, we want to keep down vehicle miles traveled, and so we want to keep as many people riding it, and we want to, I really want to make sure that we don't, that we do keep all the people that are transit dependent able to ride the transit. There was other comments about, there may be some political changes that allow more funding. So let's not jump to big cuts until we really know that we have to. There was even the mention of, can we front load our operations money from Measure B to get us past this hump? I'm in favor of those ideas of trying to keep our transit service as high as possible until we get past all this and see where it should be and get back to that increasing ridership that was so exciting. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Rob. Bob, then Glenn, and then Chappie.
Thank you very much. So I think it's slide 10 or 11. It really is the one with the BART station in Milpitas. There you go. And I wasn't quite sure when we talked or when it was presented with regard to the 15-minute, 20-minute and the impact with BART and light rail and buses, what that really meant, and had we talked to BART about them not really connecting?
Yeah, let me take the opportunity to explain a little bit more. So pre-COVID, BART was running each of their lines, the orange line and the green lines, at 15 minutes. And we were running our frequent network at 15 minutes. And so what we could do is we could time the orange line light rail service and our frequent routes to the departure and arrival of BART trains. So for example, the ideal scenario, we could time for a BART train coming in at 7:10 a.m. and then we allow maybe 5 minutes or 7 minutes for folks to walk to the buses, and then the buses depart, 7 minutes after the BART train arrives. So it feels like a very good connection for riders. But you can only do that if the times match up, if their next train is coming in 15 minutes and our next bus is coming in 15 minutes. If we have an offset frequencies, so they're at 15 or 30 and we're at 20, then it's kind of random. It's all over the map. One time you might get lucky and your VTA bus is waiting for you, and the next time it's a 12-minute wait, and then the next day it's a 3-minute wait. It just feels it's not coordinated. We do talk to BART. I talk to my counterpart at BART very often to try to coordinate schedules. BART isn't going to change their service for one of us, one of the bus operators, and so they're dealing with their own issues of what do we do in 2021 and financial considerations and all that. And they have a very structured and rigid system where they have to time trains to the tunnel and time transfers and all that. So it's really, they give us the schedules and then we do our best to coordinate with them.
And so what do you see that impact being on us, their schedule?
Well, if we do move to a 20-minute frequent network, then I would certainly expect BART ridership for our two stations to drop because our connections are not as good. And that would be one impact. Folks would probably choose to drive more to the two stations instead of taking transit because the connection wouldn't be as good. And then ridership on our routes that connected those two stations would drop as well. Quality connections and coordinated connections are kind of the foundation of any good transit network. And when you start breaking those down and folks have longer wait times to connect, then they just give up on transit.
Okay. Thank you very much. And I'm going to hold my comments till later. Thank you.
Thank you. And by the way, Bob, if you want to weigh in on your comments now, feel free to do that. The reason I was asking people to bundle them is it's hard to distinguish them. And the other is I think every member of the board is going to speak today. So, your choice.
Well, and just listening right now, I was hoping to get a little bit more from the rest of the members, but okay. Just what I heard right now, it's for me, anything that goes away from the 15 minutes just takes away from, I think, from everything. And so if you could put back the slide that was shown, not the one I asked for, but the one before, any plan that doesn't have the 15 minutes in it, I think is going to take us further away from the goal, takes us further away from the promising start that I thought we were having with the use of BART. So I wouldn't be in favor of those, even if I didn't live in Milpitas. So that would be my comment. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Bob. Thanks.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So Glenn?
Yeah, thank you. So this is a question for Raj. I think on the financial piece that you started with, and you showed what kind of the expenses and revenues look like, that was really if we were staying at a 74%, 75% level. Is that correct?
Correct.
So do we have, and I don't know if you have it now or if you could have it for the next time we talk, but if we wanted to go to an 80% model, what does that cost? And if we wanted to go to the 90% model, what does that cost? I think that would be a good thing for us to understand. It's one thing for us to say, yeah, we don't want to reduce service or we only want to go to a 90% level, but being able to understand what the assumptions are of the financial costs, I think would be very helpful.
Okay, I mean, I can give a rough order of magnitude.
That'd be great now, yeah, sure.
Refine it when I come back because I'm just doing some math in my head right now based on your question. I mean, I would say from 75 to 80%. I mean, we are running at 74 now. I'm just going to round that to 75. 75 to 80% perhaps would add a cost of about another $10 to $12 million or so. That's 75.
I think you're freezing up, Raj.
I'm sorry?
You were frozen there.
Oh, okay. Yeah. As I said, that's a rough order of magnitude. The numbers I gave, okay. If after we go and run the numbers, there may be a slight refinement to that.
Okay. Well, all I heard was to go to 80% was roughly 12 million. Did you have a 90% number?
I would say from 74 to 90 would be roughly 20 million annualized. These are annualized numbers I'm giving.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's really good. Good to know. And then for our general manager, we're having to simplify this discussion. We talk about 70, 80, 90%. I'm assuming that if whatever we picked, if we said we went to 80%, as the general manager, you still got a lot of things you have to deal with. What's the financials of this, taking a look at ridership, the scheduling of drivers and other operational issues. So if we pick the number, that's really kind of giving you direction for kind of, I'd say, what would be an upper limit. And then you would have to actually figure out operationally how to really make that happen and how it would, you know, smooth in and be implemented. Is that correct?
That is absolutely correct. One of the clear implications, of course, is the funding. Given that we did receive $141 million from CARES Act, that will take us through June 30th of next year. But also, we are working very closely with the county's education and with the health officer's office, so that we can start to think of ways that we can begin to modify the restrictions on having 6 to 7 passengers on each bus, because passing up 1,000 per day is just not acceptable. So that I believe that between now and the end of this year, we will have some better indications, one, of the school service levels, and then two, what if anything can be done to add more passengers on our 40-foot, 60 feet and our trains.
Yeah, so I think that's great. One of the things in terms of the overall messaging here, I think we should be, and when we go out to the public, we should be talking about that our real goal is to go ahead and we're trying to improve service and increase service of what goes on. And that what we're taking a look at here is related to some financial issues, but there are things going on like what you were just describing about how to try and look at the rules and what we do to go ahead and operate. And I think our macro message should be is we're trying to get above what was the 100% number. We got to figure out how to do it. But conceptually, that's our goal of where we want to get to. And to go with that, I view the 70% option that's being shown right here as just kind of for instruction purposes only to show us what could happen. I would hope that we as a board would not want to go down. If we can financially stay at least the 75% level, then we wouldn't, I don't see why we'd ever go to the 70%. In terms of what we'd want to go ahead and suggest, to me, this really is a starting financial question. I would think aspirationally, we'd want to make sure we could try and get to at least the 80% number. But again, that's going to be dependent upon how we could see that we would go ahead and be able to financially pay for it. So those are my thoughts right now. Thank you.
Madam Chair, can I give a little bit more precise numbers for Mr. Hendrick's question?
Yes, and the one thing I want to just say is we have everybody who wants to ask questions, so I'm going to ask the staff to be much more concise. We have one more item on the board, on the agenda. And then the other thing is if there's information that needs to come back so it really is precise, let's go ahead and let our board members know what will be coming back and when they can expect to see it. Go ahead, Raj.
Yeah, I mean, what I gave was just the bus, but there's a blended rate with a 90% service. It affects both bus and rail. So if you look at the blended cost for both, rough order of magnitude, every 10% service is roughly about $25 million of marginal cost. Thank you.
Thank you. Glenn, you're good?
I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll go to Chappie.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jay, I have a question on slide 17. So on the 90 plan, where we have the tier 74, 80, 90, why wouldn't we default to that plan versus say going with the 80 plan? What would be the advantage of going with the 80 plan?
We could do a number of different things that perhaps aren't shown in this slide. The reason that we showed the 3 options here is we felt like it was reasonable to make a small jump to either 80 or 70 in February, and then assess as we get more financial data and more ridership data, and then make a further jump in the future in 2021, and not make that full jump, like for example, from 74 to 90 right away in February 2021.
Right, and that makes a lot of sense to me. So that's why I was wondering what would be our incentive to lock into an 80% plan initially, as opposed to gauge ridership and So the second part of my question is, well, that's my first question. So I just don't see where there's an advantage to do that. Another question I have too is, what are the triggers? So, you know, in February, is it the number of passengers that we pass, or what would be the trigger that would cause us to bump up from 80 and then from 80 to 90?
There's a number of triggers. Ridership is one. Our financial picture is another. The social distancing, whether that's in effect or not on our buses or not, what colleges and universities and schools are doing, because if in-person instruction, we get a lot of ridership from them. So those are some examples of things that we'd want to watch. Well, also general economic activity and travel demand in early 2021 to make that decision whether to bump up later in the year.
So if we went with the 80 plan, we're effectively what we're saying is we're going to lock in at 80%, regardless of what the market conditions are.
Well,
is that a correct interpretation?
The decision that we make in December is for the service that'll happen between February and at least June, because that's the next sign up. And so whatever happens for June and October, that's not on the table yet. That's up to be determined. And we can determine that in early 2021. We just need a couple months lead time to make that happen for scheduling purposes.
Okay. Well, looking at our options, I was attracted to the tiered plan, the 90 plan, where you go to tier 74 to 80 to 90. One of the things that we do know is that we don't know what the future is going to hold. And there's going to be a lot of variables and a lot of changes in the market dynamics. And I would like to see us have as much flexibility as possible to be able to adapt and adjust to those market dynamics. If we go with a plan of the tiered plan, what is the impact on the cost reductions? Would it be a blended cost reduction? Because in your staff memo, you have the cost reductions based on each, 70, 80, and 90. But if it's blended, would it be a blended cost reduction?
Essentially, yes. That's the answer. Is if you do half at 80 and half at 90, then your cost is halfway in between, roughly. But I don't know if Raj, do you want to give any more precise answer on that?
No, I think what you mentioned is correct, Jay. It's a blended cost. When we say reduction, I mean, again, I want to be careful because we are providing right now 74%. We go to 80, there is no reduction. So the reduction Jay is talking about from pre-COVID levels. So I just want to make that very clear.
Right. I was referring to the baseline pre-COVID.
Correct. Yes. I just wanted to make sure that's understood. That's all. Thanks.
Well, thank you for that. Again, my preference would be going with the 90 plan with the tiered approach, but I'd like to hear from my colleagues on their thoughts, but that's where I'm leaning towards. Thank you.
Thank you very much. John? Mr. McAllister?
Yes, thank you. I only have one question, and I'd like to, a lot of people were talking about front loading Measure B money, and how does the staff interpret what they're asking, and how would that be implemented, if even possible?
Mr. Raj.
Sorry.
Yeah, I think just in the interest of making sure that there's some clarity, I don't want to interpret what the public is saying. All I can say at this point is that the Measure B funding is in 9 different program categories. And if it's front loading the transit account or the transit category, the transit program, that will require a presentation to the board as to what the implications are. There is a percentage per year that is allocated to each of the 9 programs. And if the front load means that you bring future years into the present, then that will require analyses and a full presentation on the on the cascading effect to the other categories, other program areas.
Would that require a supermajority vote to reallocate?
I believe that the majority vote to reallocate, supermajority vote is if there's any change. I'm not sure if it's around the funding, but I would like to ask if Evelyn Tran would want to chime in.
Thank you, Nuria. The supermajority vote only applies if there is a change in the overall program. Currently, under the 2016 Measure B, it's estimated at $500 million, and that's in present value dollars as of, I believe, 2016 dollars. So if there's a change to that overall, and we are shifting dollars from one program to another overall and not for a particular year, then it may require a supermajority vote of the board. So it depends on how that front loading is structured. We may or may not need to have that supermajority.
Okay, I just needed
Does
some
that
clarity
answer
on
your
it.
question?
Thank you. And I really don't have. Yeah, that there's. It's depending, as Nuria said, how you interpret it, and so that's why I just wanted to get some clarity from what the VTA staff was thinking about when they hear this front loading stuff. I really have no comments at this time, so I will end.
Thanks, John. Thanks, Evelyn. I'm now going to go to Larry and then to Magdalena and then to Sam.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate it. Jay, thank you for the presentation and the others involved as well. Great questions so far. Most of mine have been covered, so I will be brief. Jay, I'm curious about some of the things that sort of the perhaps unintended consequences, sort of tiering things that start happening when we start changing service levels. An example is if we're to increase headways to 20 minutes, how does that affect cities' abilities to get grants that might require service levels to be higher than that?
That's a great question. I don't think we have a good grasp on the entirety of all the programs that are out there. It certainly would have an impact because to a lot of these grant programs do piggyback on that state law that defines the 15 minutes as the major service or not. So I'd hate to try to be an expert on all the different grant programs. I'm not a land use development expert, so I'm sorry I don't have a better answer for you. We could get back to you, perhaps give you more information on other programs that we feel might be impacted.
Yeah, I think, and fair enough, absolutely, Jay. I just want to make sure that that's sort of one of the things that we're, putting somewhere in the parking lot, that we've got to figure these things out if we're going to change service levels. Grant funding is one of them. It's already been brought up, but the paratransit is another one. I'd want to make sure that if in any scenarios we come up with, if the frequency, the headways is changed, that those kinds of things are held harmless. In the last major transit update, I thought that the board had said that we were going to sort of grandfather in anyone who was using paratransit so that either their cost doesn't increase or they don't drop outside that zone. And so I'd want us to be looking at that possibility as well to make sure we hold those harmless. I think on your map, you showed the Almaden folks, and I was curious, under the 70% plan, I think one of the routes that is lost might be in South County. But would those folks still be covered because of the 68 route?
That's correct. There's two routes that would go away. One is in Mountain View and then one is in Almaden Valley. So the South County routes stay, there's no discontinuation of routes in South County.
Gotcha, okay. So those two things, I'd like to make sure that, the way that we do grant funding and things in paratransit, if there is any service reduction, that we try to hold those things harmless and not make effects on those. I'm excited about the way that you're looking at the 568, and in a lot of ways we don't know yet where the stops are, but in a lot of ways that will speed up service for some South County folks. And I think that's wonderful that you were able to find a way to do that. There are, some of my colleagues have already said there's so many variables out there that still exist that we need to maintain some level of flexibility as those things, as we learn what those are. I am interested in the conversation about Measure B that Mr. McAllister was just having, particularly as a way to, sort of fill in any gaps as, if we're looking at 80 or 90%, and, as Raj keeps working those numbers and we look at where the deficit may actually be, I think we'll see that as we go up more. And if Measure B can be brought into that conversation to backfill, I would be interested in having that conversation as well. That's all the comments I have. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Magdalena?
Yes, thank you. Well, first of all, I want to thank all of our staff for a great report and for really presenting the kind of detail that I'd be asking for. A lot of the directors have asked a lot of the questions that I've been very concerned about and have commented on it. What I'd like to know is, one of the speakers that called in talked about passing up thousands of riders due to social distancing. So I've got a couple of questions. One is, what is the protocol? How many folks can we have on a bus based on our social distancing guidelines? That's the first question. And then the second is, when we do the outreach, community outreach, I'd like to know how it's going to be done, to whom it will be addressed, and when that's going to get started. So I guess that's more than two questions, but that last one, the last one was kind of bundled under the who, what, where, when, and why.
Okay, so to answer the social distancing question, it's kind of a complicated one to answer because of, depending on the vehicle type, 40-foot bus and a 60-foot articulated bus carries a different amount of people. And so an express bus does as well. But even more complicated is the driver has to make an assessment of whether folks are in a family unit or not, because, if they're in a family unit, then the capacity can go up. So we have an operations notice that describes the limits on buses, and I don't have it in front of me. So I don't know if someone in operations wants to chime in on that question.
Thank you very much, Jay. Just very quickly, response to Board Member Carrasco's question. The CDC guidelines is a 6 feet social distancing. The county health order is a 6 feet social distancing. A 40-foot bus will be able to accommodate about 6 to maybe 7 individuals. I don't have the order that went out to our operators, but that is basically the rule of thumb. And as Jay mentioned, we have individuals that are part of a family unit that will be traveling together, so that number may vary. But what it says is that we've gone from the ability to accommodate between 40 and 60 individuals to accommodating 6 to maybe 10.
Thank you, Nuria. And to answer your question about outreach, let me describe our outreach process a little bit. First, the time frame. We wrapped up the development of these draft plans earlier this month, and so we've already started to reach out and engage the public. So like I said, our website is active and folks can go on the website, but given that we can't hold traditional in-person meetings or go to fairs or cookouts or whatever to meet people where they are, we have to, this time we're really relying on community-based organizations. So we have a list of what we call a Title VI community-based organizations that are focused on low-income minority targeted communities. Like I said, like the Hope Center, like the Refugee and Immigrant Forum. So we've reached out to every one of them and asked, hey, do you have any meetings in September and October, that we can come and we can talk and we can engage your members and we can collect your feedback. So that's one way, and frankly, probably the most successful so far way that we're getting feedback. We're also hosting a couple VTA virtual meetings that are coming up. We haven't done those yet. You know, and then of course there's all the advertisements and the flyers posted and social media and email and all that. So I hope that answers your question about the outreach process.
Yes, it does. But that brings up a lot of concerns for me, because if indeed we're passing up folks on the street due to the social distancing guidelines, we need to make sure that we're hearing from individuals who are being directly impacted by our by the CDC guidelines, by the changing you know, tiers that we're moving in, you know, as the governor you know, sets out different mandates and different requirements, and our county you know, moves from one tier to the other. I'm just very concerned that those that we should be hearing from, we may not be hearing from. And along with our chair, Supervisor Chavez, myself and several of my colleagues, we've had to invest a great amount of funding into an infrastructure that wasn't there pre-COVID, just to get the east side of San Jose connected so that our children could continue learning online. And we have many challenges that we're having to overcome. And I don't need to tell this body of leadership the kind of residents that I represent, but I will. Since I can tell, like, you're really asking me for, you know, my district is 3 of the 5 zip codes that has the highest number of COVID cases, positive COVID cases, including loss of life. But in addition to that, my district also represents and is housing a lot of the essential workers that we're so dependent upon, that keep our grocery stores open, that are door dashing, that are doing a lot of the kind of essential functions that allow the rest of us to be able to stay home and Zoom during these meetings. So the biggest concern I have, Chair, and my fellow directors, is that as we're looking at these plans, we need to make sure that we are listening to whether or not folks are going to be discouraged from using public transportation. Are they finding other means for public to get from A to B? Are they, as someone mentioned when they called in, are they selling off all assets that they possibly have in order to pay their rent, and now they're becoming newly dependent on public transportation? And so my concern is that even though we've seen the levels of ridership drop, it was based on extraordinary circumstances. But I think that we're going to actually see a greater need in this area due to the economic impact on households and the dependency on transportation, because they'll no longer have an ability to keep their own vehicle. And for some of us, that's a difficult thing to fathom. But it's what I'm living with as my neighbors are really struggling and will sit in a 3-hour-long line just to get 2 little boxes of food to make ends meet. And so I'm just very concerned about the level of service and the frequency, by the way. One is one of our board members, directors just mentioned the impact on the different types of grants that are out there. I'm especially concerned about what is it, you mentioned it in your presentation on our housing projects, and how one of the criteria is that they have a 15-minute, do you have it up there? Yeah. So of course, this is a huge concern unless we're going to be able to to change the criteria, and given the circumstances, I'm sure that a lot of things are in flux. But do we want to change it, given also that now we're not going to be aligned with BART? And so I'm just very concerned about lowering the service level and our and going to, especially going to a 70 plan and even an 80 plan just doesn't seem like a feasible option when we're thinking of all of the domino effect that it would have on so many other critical programs that we're really going to need post COVID. And then the last question I have is regarding the triggers that Director Jones brought up. So we've decided on a service plan until February, and the one that we're going to be deciding on is from February to June. And one, I think it creates a lot of confusion for our riders. I think it sets up expectations in a way that becomes potentially very discouraging for people to continue using. And one thing I want to say, for those who need public transportation and are dependent, they need it. There's no way around it. They need it. They depend on it to get to work. As the economy opens up, they'll still need it, and we'll have to help them get there. For those who we're hoping will change their lifestyle and adopt a new way of being, which is what we're hoping to do as we're looking at the climate crisis that we're facing, to have such unpredictability makes it very difficult. For instance, for me as a mother of 3, to suddenly decide to hop on a bus and leave my van behind. And so just some of the things that I think we really need to consider. But I really want for our board discussion to really delve into what that outreach is going to look like. You know, I have a whole team out there right now knocking on doors and doing census outreach and hoping to convince individuals to fill out their census forms because we're underreporting. I know that Supervisor Chavez has moved the board to contribute and to be a part of a greater messaging strategy when it comes to COVID. And so we have promotoras out there who are going to businesses. I don't know if they're going to actual residents' homes, but they're going out there and meeting people where they are face to face and letting them know about the opportunities and the challenges that COVID has suddenly thrusted upon us. And so in terms of outreach, Zooming and just depending on our CBOs, I think misses really the kind of feedback that we're looking for that's going to be critical in making these decisions come our next board meeting or whenever we're going to truly decide on this. And I'm sorry, and the last thing is this. So making the decision for February seems to be driven by signups. Is that what you're calling it, signups?
Yeah, we have 3 signups per year. That's when we can make service changes of this type.
Uh-huh. And so I don't know if, our workforce, given the unusual circumstances, is willing to look and see and come back to the table and figure out whether or not we need to change that date, because I think I don't think it should be driven by the signups. I think it should be driven by the need and the way that the economy begins to open up. Schools, whether they're going to open up or not, jobs, how we get people back to work, and how we get people back to school. And that's it for me, Chair.
Thank you. Sam, and then Therese.
Thank you, Chair.
Jay, thanks for the presentation. Forgive me because I had to step off of the Zoom meeting for a couple urgent calls. So if you've answered these questions already, just say, hey, Sam, go refer to the video and don't waste everyone's time. But can you help me understand, Jay, where it is that we're seeing the greatest frequency of riders left standing at the stop? Is that happening along our frequent network? Is it happening, is there a trend that we're seeing where that's happening the most?
Yeah, you can sum it up by saying it's the high ridership routes. It's the 22, the 23, the 25, the 66, 68, and 522. Those are the overwhelming number that are coming from those routes. Yeah.
Okay, so that tells us again, it's in the places where people are obviously transit dependent. And I know that's no shock to anyone. Jay, I thought you had a great presentation, as you always do. But I want to suggest that I think we're asking the board the wrong question. I don't think the right question is how much, although obviously it's going to be when you talk about individual routes and whether we're serving enough. But I think the more important question is where. Because what we've seen is a dramatic shift in our economy, an enormous deterioration in some industries and sectors. There are some workers who are not going to work at all. There are some workers who are working at home, and everything has changed. And I'm concerned that if we're asking the question, how much, that predisposes us to simply say, this network is the network we've got going forward. And the question is whether we dial the volume up or down. And I'm concerned about that because I see that certainly in the service goals are articulated on page 2. The 5 service goals are: number 1, avoid the elimination of entire routes. Number 2, maintain frequent network of routes. Now, I'm all for maintaining frequency. I just don't know, is it the same network or a different one? And I guess where I'm going with all this is it really starts with the data that you showed that was so compelling on slides, I think it was 4 and 5. So we looked at the ridership over the last 6 months, right? We had this huge devastating drop from February to April, and it's been more or less flat since then. And in fact, we even had a little drop in July. And if you go to the next slide, if we could, if you go to that slide, I think it's slide 5 that shows the transit service hours. And forgive me, I'm looking to see if that's up now for everyone to see.
It should be.
It is.
Yeah, okay, great, wonderful, thank you. If you, and I apologize, I got bad service in my house right now. We got a lot of folks online. So anyway, so that's why I'm not on video. The transit service hours have increased since March. Now, obviously we're not to the pre-COVID levels, but we've dramatically improved from a very low base, right? From 58% to 74%. Obviously we'd all love to see it above 100%. But what that tells me is that we are not seeing ridership rise with more service. And what tells me is that either people are just too scared for all the obvious reasons, right? And fear is not necessarily irrational, right? There's plenty of good reasons to be scared. But also that maybe we're just providing the wrong service. And the notion of just turning up the volume and expecting folks will show up because we're increasing service is not supported right now in the data. And it's not supported despite the fact we've actually opened BART service in that time period. And we know obviously there's limitations in BART, but we're not seeing the ridership respond. And so I guess I just wanted to offer, if what we know is that transit dependent residents are being left out at the bus stop, and there are probably some tech campuses that are ghost towns right now, really the answer isn't how much. I mean, what we should be doing is providing more frequent service along those frequent routes, so we're not leaving people standing, and eliminate some routes altogether that we know are serving places where frankly, 80% of the folks are working from home. And so I just want to throw that out there. If you've already made this point at some point when I jumped off the call, please forgive me, but I'd be interested in your thoughts.
Yeah, those are great points. One thing I'll say is we do recognize that travel patterns have already changed and will certainly change coming out of this pandemic. And that's why in 2021, we'll definitely be monitoring and we'll adjust. And maybe there'll be some difficult decisions that we have to make in later 2021 or 2022 about, deployment of our service across the network. Some of the things that I didn't mention that we've seen since the COVID impact on our travel patterns, the ridership routes saw ridership fall like all routes, but less so than our coverage routes. Well, the overarching theme that we're seeing is that coverage routes really dropped dramatically, and people are really staying on the ridership oriented routes, so the frequent network, right? So it's kind of a doubling down on the core of our system. So it's a good point that you make. And the last thing I want to say is you have to remember that the social distancing capacity limitations are also in effect. And so it's throwing things all kind of out of whack. Just last week, I stood out on the Alameda and watched 322s go by in a row, and all three of them were full, and they were passing people up waiting at the stops. That's 45 minutes of service. So no doubt that's going to have an impact on ridership as well. So there's all these factors at play that really kind of messing with all the data. So yeah, you're right. We'll monitor through 2021 as we go, and we'll have to make some choices about changing our network.
Okay, I appreciate the point. And yeah, I mean, I know this is not gonna be popular because it means we have to choose among favored children here and actually cut routes, but I think we need to rethink our service goals in this COVID world. And if choice riders are simply not making the choice to ride transit, and I think we've all read the stories about how used car sales are booming despite this horrible recession, then maybe the answer is we increase service along that route on Alameda so people aren't watching 3 buses ride by. And we decide we're going to make really hard choices about what we don't serve. And then we can have a different discussion about how much. But anyway, I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thanks, Sam. Teresa?
Thank you. So I've had the benefit of listening to a lot of the wise inputs of all my colleagues, and I agree with a lot of the comments, and particularly I want to echo what Mayor Liccardo just said, because some of my theme is kind of like, I know that we have a very, by nature somewhat bureaucratic, and it has to be a very organized system. But if somehow we could find a way to be flexible, like Director Carrasco mentioned, one of the things that I was going to bring up, we've had several of our colleagues from ATU call in, and the benefit of, the concerns of their membership and the important role that they play. Maybe there is a way we could find, during this time to be a little more flexible with the scheduling process. And like I said, with what Mayor Liccardo was saying, where are the people who, are our core ridership that we need to make sure that we are protecting their needs? So I would say, how could we be flexible? And that flexibility pertains into, as I thought more about it, the same issues about, the funding model might change, or the fact that we do have some CARES money, that we could perhaps take a little bit more of a risk than I would normally want to take. So the places where I would want to have more data back is about, how flexible can we be, and the impact specifically on the revenues from the grants, and the impact on, like, when the whole thing about the density bonus, do we face, if we cut some of this, will projects that are in process, affordable housing projects in process, will they be impacted? So that's some of my goals, and I would even be interested in looking at, is there a way to do something with the Measure B funding? So, but thanks to everybody for all the data.
Thank you. I want to just, I'm going to go to Jeannie, and then just make sure all of my colleagues who wanted to speak up have a chance to do so. So we'll go to Jeannie, give it one last round, and then I'll make some comments.
Okay, I'll try and be really quick here, Chair. First of all, I want to start off by saying thank you to staff. I thought this was an excellent presentation. I think it laid a lot of things out there, opened up the kimono on a lot of things, and clearly a lot of thought has been put into this. And I also want to compliment members of the public. A lot of you did mention and you acknowledge the difficulties that we are faced with, and sometimes it takes a good crisis to appreciate what you had versus where you are right now, and how do we get back to that and beyond. Two things in particular I wanted to comment on. First, piggybacking off of what Mayor Liccardo had said in terms of, the question being where. What in my mind, when we talk about the frequent routes on our network, the 15-minute headways, when we're looking at this, can we make sure we're asking ourselves on those particular routes, what do we mean by 15 minutes? Because having a bus go every 15 minutes, yet having 3 buses having to pass a stop because people are there, is it 15 minutes based on how we schedule them, or is it 15 minutes based on the users and what their experience is? Because as we look at this, I would also, I think, support what I believe Mayor Liccardo was saying, is that we need to look at the frequent network, and if it means putting more buses on there so we minimize the pass ups, because I think we break the spine of our overall network, I think it's going to be hard to bring that back. So that would be my input on that. The other thing is I want to thank you in bringing to light the land use programs and planning stuff. Yeah, this is not in our wheelhouse, but it definitely affects a lot of what's going on. I think we need to look, this is a long view. So what we're doing right now is some short-term things. And so even if some routes go below 15 minutes, which is, for example, the major transit stop definition, I think what the things that would be helpful for local jurisdictions, for the grantors and such, what of these things are really more part of our path to recovery, therefore are temporary in nature, and with COVID, who knows how you define temporary, versus what are likely not to come back. Because I guess I was looking at this as these things are likely to come back, and when we look at some of these developments don't get approved today and get shovels in the ground tomorrow. There's long times on these, so I would hope that we can maybe come up with clear communications to local jurisdictions, to grantors, so that basically there should be, if you want to use the term, a waiver in place, or the hold harmless, as Larry introduced, but trying to figure out how those should not impact local decisions, because our goal is hopefully by the time something gets built, that our recovery on terms of transit will be there and keep pace with that. So those were my comments. Thank you, everybody. And thanks to all my colleagues for all their wonderful questions.
Thank you. Raul?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I got lost service a couple of times, so my hand went down. I didn't realize, and so I just put it back up. Thank you, Chair. And a lot of great comments have been said. I want to echo in regards to, it's embarrassing the number of people that we are leaving behind in these transit dependent communities, and I definitely think that needs to be a priority for us as we make some of these shifts. And then I will just piggyback on some of the comments in regards to the frequency of even if it's a tiered approach to the 90%, that I think that would be the best approach at the moment, from what I know, I would want to support. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you. So first of all, I just wanted to, I will also acknowledge the staff. I thought this was really a very helpful discussion. Before I make my comments, I just wanted to let staff know that we're going to take the next item that's on the agenda, and we're going to move it, and I'll work with Nuria and Elaine to place it at the appropriate time. And the reason is it's a really important topic. I don't want people to be rushed, and I know that 3 hours is a long time to be focused on one subject matter. Let me just make a couple of observations and then a request. So first of all, I think the point that all of you raised about how important it is that we really huddle together to figure out how to make sure that VTA doesn't just survive, but that it thrives, and that we're in the best position possible to take advantage of the changing times, is really kind of a theme that I heard. The other theme that I heard is making sure that we really are continuing to move forward as an organization, and that we don't want to be leaving people behind. I want to make some requests for information. I'm going to then talk a little bit about outreach, and then talk a little bit about the safety protocols. As it relates to the key questions that people asked, I do think that we need to have a better understanding of the impacts to the grant program funding for housing. I don't think that's small for cities, and we're really asking cities to do more in terms of density. I think the point that was raised by Jeannie is a good one. I'm a little concerned that I don't know how much flexibility grantors will allow for, and also, you know, RENA and a bunch of other things are in process right now that could be impacted. So I think we need to be able to quantify that. And Jay, what I would suggest to get input on that would be to talk to the planning departments of the cities, so that they can give, because they'll know how much money is coming. And our offices, anybody who has an office of housing development is looking at these too. And I'm happy to offer the county staff to help you with that. The second is that I think the board needs to see, again, an annualized breakdown by the 9 program categories of how we're planning to spend Measure B over the next 5 and 10 years. I think that will help people understand whether or not how front loading would or should happen, and what the impacts would or could be to other programs. And I think the options for the board should be also structured around what kind of vote would need to be taken under which scenario. So under scenario A, where there's a deferral but not a programmatic change, where you're frontlining some but recognizing that in 10 years we'll have less money for transit. If that's not a supermajority vote, just to be able to explain that, versus if in fact we wanted to take money from some program categories as a group. And then the next thing I think would be really important to understand is the graph that you showed us with the funding. I actually thought that one graph that explained the funding options relative to 70% or 74% with high risk, I forgot if it was high risk or low risk or conservative and liberal, or however you divided that up. I do think that same slide needs to be demonstrated for at a 75, at an 80, and then moving up to that 90 percentile. And I think the other thing that needs to be included is what happens to reserves in either of those cases. And that includes not just the operating reserve, but also the sales tax stabilization fund. So the board really does understand what the risks are and opportunities with a bunch of different scenarios. And then I appreciated very much Jay pointing out the detail on where we're leaving people versus where we are picking people up, and that these are on higher. Earlier, Jay, you said it was sort of happening all over the county, but I understand your point is these routes have a spine, but they're going into a lot of different directions. I think helping the board understand with specificity as much as we can predict, or we have some experience with the people that we're passing up, is going to be important, because I think it speaks to the question that Mayor Liccardo raised around using data to inform where, for example, would we increase the number of buses that are on those lines, or where might we decrease a route or two if we needed to do that. And then finally, I do think that as we think about the public safety protocol, and I just want to say to my colleagues that our general manager, Fernandez, has been, really trying to work with between VTA and the county to look at what are the best safety protocols for our public transit. And I just want to acknowledge for my colleagues that the point that Mayor Liccardo raised that was fascinating is that, we're not only seeing an increase in people buying used cars, but what we're also seeing is an increase in people taking almost every kind of new method to get back on the road, more walking, more bike riding, more driving, and we're still seeing a drop in transportation. And so what I think that means is that all of our agencies, including the county, need to work more closely with VTA and other of the transit agencies, because it is in all of our interest that transportation thrive. And so looking at the protocols that we have, not just the social distancing, but other kinds of protocols that we have, working with our unions, by the way, because we want our frontline workers to be safe, to make sure that we are really maximizing the ability for people to ride in a safe way. And what I'd like to recommend is that we, the VTA and the county will continue to work on this, but we should set ourselves a goal of having a report out to the VTA board in December about where we are in the process between the health officer and VTA in terms of how we're going to proceed, and that we work with the unions to get their feedback to those protocols. And also, you know, I'm very interested, Nuria, in the final timeline of what percentage of the buses will have the protections for the drivers that are actually out on the street by that December, January, February timeframe, because any changes I think are going to need to be made in concert with, you know, safety changes as well. And then I don't know, Nuria, did you want to comment on that?
Yes, just thank you very much, and I appreciate you laying out these. I counted up to 5, but I'll defer to Elaine, who is a good secretary capturing all of these referrals. In regards to the safety protocol, I think that is really going to be an important process, and I appreciate the county and all of the departments within the county that have been working with us in that space. A report out by December, absolutely possible. As it relates to the driver barriers, it all depends on the type of vehicle. So I think that when we come back to you, you'll see dates of when those are delivered and installed based on the type of vehicle that we're buying the barriers for. We have different type of buses, and there is a back order, or at least not so much a back order, but we have been informed of delays in the delivery of some of the barriers. So the dates that we had hoped to achieve have been modified slightly. So we will have a full picture ready for the board in December.
Thank you. And by the way, Nuria, for most of the requests for information, the requests that were made earlier, I just was clarifying them because so many people made different versions of them. The last thing that I wanted to just touch on was something that Councilmember Carrasco raised, and this is really around communication and outreach. And 2 things that I know you all have prepared are some really great flyers for us to be able to send in our newsletters and social media. And I know that a number of my colleagues who are on do their newsletters in multiple languages, which I think is really fabulous and one good way to get people engaged. One other point that I just want to touch on is that I do think that being able to explain how we're doing outreach, particularly in the Spanish speaking community, is going to be really critical. And if there are other languages that we're going to be doing meetings in, because what may make more sense is to do some meetings just in language, right? Just in Spanish and maybe in Vietnamese as well. But I would ask you to take a look at the demographics of our riders, and then work with the offices that are in those areas that are most impacted to see whether or not we can do just meetings in single language. One of the things I was going to point out is that when we were trying to help people not be so fearful about getting their COVID tests, then a number of folks did, Facebook Live or did announcements that were just in one language, in Spanish and Vietnamese, and it was very, very helpful in terms of getting people to come out and get tested. And what Magdalena touched on earlier about the work we're doing with Promotoris and others, one of the things we might want to consider is whether or not there's an opportunity to work with the folks that are already doing that outreach now and just be part of their outreach program. So for example, where we're giving out food or diapers, it's probably a great place to give out flyers to people as well. And then to be able to organize meetings in language and in Spanish or Vietnamese, and of course in English. All right, so those are my my thoughts. I'm very much looking forward to the information coming back and to the outreach occurring. And the other, just as meetings are happening, if you, to all of my colleagues, if those of you who have community meetings coming up, if you wouldn't mind reaching out to Elaine, and Elaine can coordinate with Jay so that we make sure we have a speaker who can jump on the on your agenda. And for those of you who don't have meetings but would like to do something special with Jay, I would just encourage you to do that. I think that might be, you know, really good way to go. One other thing, Jay, I don't know the answer to this, but have you all, for something like this, would you go out to city council meetings potentially if someone wanted to hear you on their agenda?
That's an option, absolutely.
Great. So that's another thing I would just say then, if VTA is open to it, if any of you would like to hear this at a committee meeting or at a full council meeting, it's another really great way to get the information out. All right, I was gonna ask John Courtney a question, and I can't tell if he's still on or not. Could you unmute? Could I ask staff to unmute him and see if he is on still? John, are you still on the line?
Yes, he is on the line. John?
Hi, I'm here.
Oh, great. Hey, John, I know that you had a chance to hear the discussion, and one question I wanted to just make sure I asked you and would be interested in getting your thoughts on is that on the, and I was thinking about this when Jay was making the point about the different routes that are being left, and I was wondering how long in normal times is it taking the emergency buses to come out, and are there routes that you are most worried about us leaving people?
Yeah, I think I can answer that. There's a couple answers to that. We have what are called standby buses, and those are pre-designated already out with operators waiting by. There's not very many standby operators, but generally speaking, and more often than not, the procedure is for the operator who pulls up to, say, First and Keys with a full bus and sees 4 or 5 people there, they will press a button. We've designated a new call system on the button. That call goes to OCC. OCC is Central Control Communications, and then that call goes from OCC to the dispatcher, and then the dispatcher has to get an operator to get a bus and obviously give the instructions, and then the operator has to check the bus out for safety, and that generally takes half an hour at least, because you have to check the bus out. All of that stuff takes between half an hour and 45 minutes.
Thank you.
And I wanted to say one other thing, Cindy, because I listened in the call while I was at a hearing, and I heard about, you know, the asking the union for flexibility on signups. I just want to remind VTA, and I understand nobody knew the pandemic was coming, but we focused so much on lining our signups up with BART that we kind of pigeoned ourselves into 3 signups a year, where we used to have 4. And I think working with Raj and Naria during this pandemic, I think we have expressed expressed that we are willing to work together to get this done. So I wanted to put that out there for everybody. There are options, there are contractual options, and there are ways that we can get this done that would afford VTA flexibility working with the union.
Thanks, John. All right, so I wanted to just thank my colleagues again. There's no action, it was just a feedback opportunity. We are going to move item 3.2 to our next meeting time. And I think that was really all we had for today. Let me just look real quick to make sure I didn't miss anything. Are there any other items from the board that I may have forgotten, or are there any announcements? Well, seeing none, our next meeting is on October 1st at 5:30. And of course, it'll be held via video conference. I want to thank all the public speakers. We had quite a few of them. today, and they all gave really good feedback. And we are in fact adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you all. We will end the meeting for all now. Thank you.
Bye, thank you.